Manhattan Stardust, Chapter 9, Que Sera, Sera. Just because someone or something does something to someone doesn't mean that that something or someone is to blame. If you, unlike me, wanted to be philosophical about it, you might say that the changes we noticed in Miranda may have simply been the natural consequence of a gradual evolution rather than a punctuation marking the effect of a cause. Well, now you can see why I'm not a philosopher. As I was saying, or trying to say, Miranda was acting a bit differently. You might have said that Jennifer's recent musketeering sabbatical had left a residue, or that the reception of Boris's fellow Marcusians to her Bach recital had made a dent, or even that the entry of another orbiting star in our constellation, in the form of Helena, had altered the harmonic balance. I'm sure my ex, Doreen, would have suspected Miranda's unknown and no doubt unspeakable feelings about her parents as the chief culprit, or perhaps cigars. Anyway, whatever was going on, something was going on, because Miranda had begun to eat cheese. She, if anything, was a committed vegan who could barely contain her displeasure when she spotted a container of yogurt in the fridge, although she proved her veganism by exception in the matter of footwear, a room full of elegantly tooled leather shoes and boots from Italy and Spain. But here, too, was the stranger thing. Her favorite walking boots had become retreads, literally, and she went from walking on air to walking on used car tires. Well, she's entitled, I said to Jennifer one Sunday morning as we lolled about languorously in bed, to evolution. Don't you mean devolution? I couldn't have meant devolution because I wasn't sure what that was, and I told her, but she merely frowned, and then we decided to languor a bit more in bed, not fretting over much that Miranda had left for her new creative writing seminar. As I said, she's entitled, and as Miranda said, she was more than entitled, even if it created a slight perturbation in the Sunday morning orbital. And as she said on her way out the door to Helena, who was on her way in, "What's wrong with wanting to be published?" And as Helena said, nothing before exchanging pecks in passing, adding, "Hey, love the hair," which was another thing. When I first met Miranda at a poetry reading where she held a violin aloft and wailed for approximately 3 minutes, not including the occasional gulp for air, and managed to enthrall Casper Sarcophagus, Jasper hiding behind his poetic nom de plume, she had hair, lots of it, which accounted for most of her bulk and profile. And then she got a few different cuts, including a page boy, before going back to the mane that was in evidence on Staten Island. As far as I was concerned, she looked fabulous with or without hair anywhere. And her sporting the bald look only raised my eyebrows because it seemed kind of sudden. One day, 2 weeks ago to be precise, she was Miranda the fox or cheetah with a mane, and then the day after, which was coincidentally the day after her first Sunday morning creative writing class, she was bald, or nearly bald because there was a bit of shadow caused by stubble up top. The other thing, and there seemed to be lots of things piling up, I know, was that when she returned from her classes, the usually exuberant and tough as nails I dare you darling flirtatiousness was as abundant as her now disappeared hair. Miranda was nothing if not electrifying in her allure and sinuously enchanting charm, and now she was, well, downcast and rather drab. When Jennifer pushed, that's not the right mot, juste or not, because Jennifer actually caressed Miranda's cheek that evening. What Jennifer did was gently ask her how things were going, and Miranda shot back as if she'd been prodded by a malevolent stingray. "You proved your point, didn't you, Jennifer?" And she accentuated the final syllable of her name, just in case there was any doubt, with that idiot in that travesty of a play by getting to where you wanted to go, even if, and Miranda paused for a millisecond, it meant jeopardizing everything. And you, she continued, turning to a bewildered and truly innocent Helena, you've been getting your work out there in those egghead journals, haven't you? I did see that Helena had narrowed her eyes, but Miranda's energy carried the field. Even Gary submits things which are accepted. The IRS values what you do, doesn't it, Gary? The thread was fast unraveling, so I merely nodded and watched to see whether Miranda would be dangling from the petard she had hoisted. So can you fault me for wanting to get my poetry published? Can you? Ah, that was it. Of course not, we all exclaimed simultaneously. Good, so just leave me alone. And she left, alone, and returned, alone except for something that was even more of a non sequitur, a hamburger, which she swallowed in 2 passes before going off, alone again, to work at the class assignment, to describe an angel dancing on a bed of nails in a postmodern netherworld. Not bad as far as assignments went, except for the restriction to approximately 30 poetic words. And except for Miranda's avowed distaste for angels, which she didn't believe in, and postmodernism, which she believed in less than she believed in angels. The Miranda we once knew, anyway. Eventually, Miranda explained to us all that she was tired of laboring in the shadows, meaning that she was tired of writing oodles of verse, unrhymed, that defied all odds by attaining a rejection rate of 100%. No matter how she crafted a phrase or fiddled with commas, the poetic establishment was unanimous in sending back the polite, encouraging word for her to keep on writing and submitting elsewhere. But Miranda, being no dummy, figured out that a foot in the door was necessary to get the gatekeepers to let down the drawbridge, and that she'd gotten a golden opportunity for that foot when she heard that somebody from Iowa was coming into town to teach the hicks in New York a thing or two about smithying a word. So you see, explained Miranda in one of her now rare easygoing moods, if I can impress Gladys, the creative writing guru, she'll pave the way. It's a foot in the door, folks. A pity, however, that her foot was now shod with discarded rubber rather than those racy numbers that set my heart into overdrive. But I was willing to make the sacrifice if this would make her happy, as were Jennifer and even Helena. We were all waiting for the happy, expectantly, but all we got was moroseness, bristling, and a Miranda who began to espouse a Neanderthal diet regardless of the Neanderthal lifespan, because Gladys recommended it to her pupils. In fact, Gladys had been making lots of other recommendations, which Miranda couldn't wait to share with us and put into action. The gal who sauntered to the deli in a casually arranged outfit that smoldered was now draping herself in what looked like sackcloth, and she was spending most of her nights in the spare bedroom teasing out a few more words for the weekend seminars, alone. Writing, she gushed, isn't just about writing, Gary. It's about finding out who you really are. Gladys is amazing in how she gets us to become what's there and not there. Gee, I answered, what's she look like? What does that have to do with anything? Is she bald too? Interjected a more fearless Jennifer. Miranda slammed the door and told the two of us to, well, let's just say we followed her instructions, but not in the way she meant, because it was great fun. Now, I'm your biggest fan when it comes to evolution, what I know of it at least, and I've been going on about the death knell for every Shangri-La in history being a lack thereof. But this kind of evolution didn't seem destined to prod our starship into the heavens, so I called Emilio, Miranda's co-worker, at Jennifer's prodding. Hey, Emilio, can I ask you a favor, buddy? Sure thing, Gary. Sure? Absolutely. Good. I just need to ask you a question. Gary, I owe you one. Yeah, okay, I just don't want to put you in the position. Enough already. What is it? Miranda. Oh, yeah, I know. I was afraid to say anything. What's going on? That's what I was going to ask you. She stares at the walls all day with a scrap of paper in front of her, and no offense to you or anybody else, she looks like she's from the Midwest. No flair whatsoever. None. Zilch. She looks, in fact, like a bag of potatoes. A small one, but, well, you know what I mean. She's in a writing class. No kidding. That's all she can talk about, or rather, all she can talk about is this Gladys, the teacher. But the worst of it is the poetry. What do you mean? Her poetry. Gary, look, published or not, her stuff was good. It had punch. It had heart. It had a finger on the pulse of the class struggle. And now it's worse than Jasper's early material. It says absolutely nothing in however many words Gladys assigns. I'm worried about her. So am I, and so is Jennifer. And Helena's wondering what the hell she got herself into. Do you really think 4 can work? Let's get back to Miranda. Well, Gary, as I see it, and I hate to be the bearer of bad tidings, I think she's in love with Gladys. I passed the info on to Helena and Jennifer, concluding with the bleakness that I'm not accustomed to. I guess there's nothing we can do. Miranda walked in on us just as we were wrapping up our strategy session, and despite being in love with Gladys, she could still sniff out trouble in paradise. What's up? She asked. Nothing's up, said Helena, fairly sweetly if dishonestly. Don't you mean what's wrong? Asked Jennifer of Miranda, because, she continued without waiting for a reply, something's not right. And Jennifer, to her credit, laid it all out. Look at you, she ended. Where's the sexy socialist I knew? The one who could stir a hedge fund manager's heart with her words. The one who used to let me read her poems to her. Well, that was news to me. I knew they were close, but Jennifer, I'm sorry if you can't handle a more genuine person. Don't you understand, any of you, that this is for me? That through Gladys, and Miranda's face actually changed color, I finally come into myself? No, I said, and I said it. Then see for yourself. Next week, Gladys is giving a lecture, and her students are going to read their creations in public, and I'm one of them. Me, the real me. See if you can handle who I really am, and then pass judgment. She left for her bedroom, and Jennifer said, You know, it would be easier if she were having an affair with that damn Gladys. I only wish, shouted Miranda from behind her closed door, then I'd really be in a real heaven. Then come out of there and talk this through like a woman, yelled Helena back, surprising us all. When Miranda sulkily appeared, Helena, with scientific keenness, went right for the jugular, and she reminded me a little of my big sister, actually. What's the attraction? Ha ha, you think this is physics? Helena left before she could hear Miranda turn to Jennifer and me and tell us, It's about purity, if you really care to know. The purity of the person and the purity of the word. And for words, that means everything and anything extraneous has to go. There's no room for it. And what's left? I said after Jennifer had left. Come to the lecture, Gary. It'll be as clear as black and white. Even you can understand that. Well, there was no doubt, as Helena, Jennifer, and I learned as soon as we got to the auditorium at NYU, that Gladys was bald. And so were the dozen pupils who had been in her seminar, male and female. And there was no doubt that Gladys, in helping her pupils achieve who they were and are and would be, was turning their poetry into what she, Gladys, thought it should be, because they all sounded the same. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because I'm passing over the lecture that Gladys gave before the readers read. I can't say I followed much, but there was a lot about objective correlatives and gender and, no surprise, purity. And there was even more about honesty. what she defined as something that involved not being afraid to surrender your own ideas and self and soul to somebody else who seemed suspiciously like her, I mused. She finished by reading several dozen of her own honest poems, and the impression they left was pretty ethereal. They seemed to be about nothing much. Poems about nothing I can handle, especially now that Helena has given me the scientific view of nothing. But poems about nothing much, well, even Jasper gave up on that tack. Miranda was the last of the disciples to read, and her poem, all 25 words and titled Tranquil Bones, elicited the same kind of applause her Caliban-like yells once elicited, polite and soft and sparse. However, out of gratitude to the GP, general public, and as a service to the community, a brief open mic session followed. I'll say this, the poorly dressed souls who trundled up to the front of the stage must have revised their offerings because they too sounded like the official readers who had come before them, except for Jennifer. Yes, except for Jennifer. Just as the guru Gladys was about to bring the proceedings to a merciful close, Jennifer raised her hand and stood up, and I could see that the shaved and rustic Gladys didn't approve of the exotically beautiful and craftily accoutred denizen of Shangri-La. But not having much choice, she allowed our supernova to the podium. Miranda, whom I keenly watched, nearly twitched out of her seat, but she kept her cult-like cool and smiled a smile of condescending pity. Jennifer knew how to run a meeting or two, given her day job hobnobbing with millionaires and other banksters, and she wasn't easily cowed, even by the several student groans as she pulled out a full 3 sheets of foolscap. Okay, it was really just plain old 8.5 by 11 typescript. I couldn't resist, and began. But first she wanted to credit the author, none other than Miranda herself, who quickly turned crimson and then an even deeper red under the questioning glance of her tutor. And Jennifer read. I forget the title of the opus, but it was from one of Miranda's bundle of unpublished works, unburdened by the need for purity, because Jennifer was all hot-blooded drama and passion and tenderness and slate of heart, and it ended on a kind of quiet little wisp of a phrase that made me gulp and made the audience erupt. True, it wasn't the kind of applause that erupted on Staten Island during the Marseillaise, but it was applause, not the drips and drabs. Jennifer returned to her seat with everyone's eyes plastered to her form and grace, and Miranda's face was by now blotchy and a little moist. Gladys, however, couldn't resist a few more words about the kind of poetry and writing she and her students were all about, which was decidedly not about the impure, she said, glaring at Jennifer, or possibly Jennifer's open blouse. It was hard to tell. Maybe it was the way Gladys inflected charlatan, or maybe it was just one of those things, but Miranda, left by me for dead, came back to life, and she did so pretty dramatically. If she'd ever had any wishes for Tranquil Bones to be included in Gladys's new anthology, they were dashed to pieces when she leapt from her seat, grabbed the mic from her guru, publicly thanked her fellow comrade and bona fide musketeer, and then ran to the very top of the auditorium where we were sitting to give Jennifer a hug and several long, searching kisses, all to an even greater applause than had followed anything before. Gladys, being a seasoned academic type, wasn't easily fazed. She reacted quickly. She was back at the microphone with acid remarks about hypocrisy and whatnot in a smooth, wordy kind of way that kept the audience in their seats upon pain of death, and she threw in a few cracks about gold coins and betrayal. And that's when Miranda stunned even me, and I thought, given her display of arson and violins, that I was beyond being stunned by her. No. Miranda turned towards the speaker and, lofted is, I think, the accurate word, not hurled. Lofted first one rubber shoe, and then another in the direction of the proselytizer, who, in fact, was stunned, figuratively speaking. Though landing harmlessly at Gladys's similarly shod feet, they succeeded in stopping the flow of words long enough for us to beat a hasty retreat. Back at headquarters, words weren't really necessary, and when they were more for respite from the wonderful wordlessness that had been going on. Maybe, said our newcomer Helena to the seasoned musketeer Miranda, if I had kissed you before I kissed Jennifer, this never would have happened. Or maybe, said I, if the Staten Island crowd had liked your Bach. Or maybe, added Jennifer, que sera, sera. I don't know, said Miranda dreamily. Just tell me how long I should let my hair grow back.